I pulled up to the Meridian Apartments with my U-Haul trailer, glad to finally have a place after weeks of searching. The building was older than it had looked online, a 7-story brick structure with ornate cornices that hinted at its 1930s origins. Nothing fancy, but it was in my price range and close enough to downtown Seattle that I wouldn't need to drive everywhere. As I grabbed my first box from the trailer, an older man approached from the building entrance. He moved with purpose despite his age, his thin frame wrapped in a faded plaid shirt tucked neatly into khaki pants. "You must be John Gregory," he said, extending a weathered hand. "Henry Hansen. I own the building." I shifted my box to shake his hand. "Nice to meet you. Thanks for holding the apartment for me." Henry nodded curtly, reaching into his pocket to produce a set of keys and a folded piece of paper. "Apartment 7B. Rent's due first of the month." He handed me the keys, then unfolded the paper and held it out with unusual firmness. "These are the building rules. Follow them exactly. No exceptions." I took the paper, expecting the usual stuff about quiet hours and trash disposal. Instead, I found a handwritten list of 4 items. 1. Never answer your door after 10 p.m., no matter who knocks. 2. Don't use the elevator after 11 p.m., take the stairs. 3. If you hear laughter coming from the laundry room, leave immediately. 4. If you see a tall woman in the hallways, do not make eye contact with her. I looked up from the paper with a confused smile. Is this some kind of joke? Henry's pale blue eyes narrowed. "This isn't a joke, Mr. Gregory. These rules keep my tenants safe." He tapped the paper with one bony finger. "Follow them. Every one of them. No exceptions." I folded the paper and tucked it in my pocket. "Okay, sure." Henry watched me for a moment longer, as if trying to decide whether I was taking him seriously. Finally, he pointed toward the building entrance. "Elevators to the right in the lobby. Your apartment's on the 7th floor." As he walked away, I grabbed my box again and headed inside, chalking up the strange rules to an old man's eccentricity. Maybe he was just being overly cautious about safety. The building was old, after all. The elevator might be unreliable at night, and maybe there had been break-ins or something that prompted the door rule. The lobby was small but clean, with marble floors that had seen better days and a row of brass mailboxes along one wall. The elevator was indeed to the right, an old-fashioned model with a metal accordion gate that I had to pull closed manually. My apartment was small but decent, a 1-bedroom with a tiny kitchen and living room. The bathroom had outdated tile, but everything worked, and the bedroom was big enough for my queen mattress. The windows looked out over the street, giving me a partial view of downtown. I spent the next few hours hauling boxes up from the U-Haul, grateful that the elevator, despite its age, seemed reliable enough. By evening, I had most of my stuff inside, though unpacked boxes still filled most of the available floor space. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. I arranged my furniture, hung a few pictures, and started learning the rhythms of my new home. The building was quieter than I expected, with most residents keeping to themselves. I did meet a few neighbors. Beverly Contreras from 7A across the hall introduced herself when we both checked our mail at the same time. She was around my age, maybe a little older, with blonde hair usually pulled back and a polite but somewhat reserved manner. She mentioned she'd been in the building for about 8 months and worked as a graphic designer. Zayden Skinner lived down the hall. I ran into him when he helped me carry groceries up after seeing me struggle with too many bags. He wore glasses and business casual clothes, and told me he worked in tech downtown. He seemed friendly enough, offering tips about the neighborhood and mentioning a good coffee shop around the corner. Both Beverly and Zayden seemed completely normal, which made Henry's strange rules seem even more out of place. I'd pretty much forgotten about them by the time Thursday night rolled around a week after moving in. I was watching a movie on my laptop when I heard 3 distinct knocks on my door. I paused the film and checked the time on my phone. 10:47 p.m. Something about those knocks made me hesitate. They weren't particularly loud or aggressive, just 3 evenly spaced raps. Then I remembered Henry's first rule. Never answer your door after 10 p.m., no matter who knocks. It seemed silly now that I was actually faced with the situation. What if it was an emergency? What if one of my neighbors needed help? I got up and walked to the door, pressing my ear against it for a moment. I couldn't hear anything. No voices, no movement. "Who is it?" I called. No answer. I looked through the peephole but couldn't see anyone directly in front of my door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I unlatched the deadbolt, then turned the knob and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty directly in front of me, but as I leaned out to look both ways, I noticed something at the far end of the corridor near the elevator. A figure stood there, motionless. In the dim hallway lighting, I could make out what looked like a person, but something wasn't right about the proportions. The figure seemed stretched somehow, too tall and too thin to be normal. It wore dark clothing that blended with the shadows, making its exact shape hard to determine. A chill ran up my back as I stared at it. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, facing in my direction. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "Can I help you?" The figure remained perfectly still, giving no indication it had heard me. The distance between us was maybe 30 feet, but something about its presence made it feel much closer, as if it were somehow pressing against the air between us. I gripped the doorframe, suddenly very aware that I had broken Henry's first rule. The hallway felt colder than it should have, and the lights seemed to dim slightly as I watched the disturbing presence at the corridor's end. "Is someone there?" I tried again, louder this time. Still no response, no movement. Just that strange, stretched silhouette standing perfectly still, facing my direction. I retreated into my apartment and locked the door, turning the deadbolt with a quick twist and adding the chain for good measure. My heart was still racing from what I'd seen in the hallway. That figure, impossibly tall and thin, hadn't moved an inch since I first spotted it. I stood with my back against the door for a few moments, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was it just a trick of the light? Some weird shadow cast by the old hallway fixtures? But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Henry's rules suddenly seemed less like the paranoid ramblings of an eccentric old man, and more like actual warnings. After a minute or two of standing frozen by the door, I couldn't help myself. I had to look again. I leaned forward carefully and peered through the peephole. The figure was still there, exactly as before, standing motionless at the far end of the hallway near the elevator. Its proportions were all wrong. Too tall, too thin, like someone had grabbed a normal person and stretched them out. I couldn't make out any clear features in the dim hallway lighting, just that dark silhouette that seemed to absorb the light around it. I checked my watch. 5 minutes had passed since I had first seen it. I paced around my living room, glancing nervously at the door every few seconds. Each time I returned to the peephole, the figure remained in the exact same position, completely still. Not even the slight movement you'd expect from someone breathing. 10 minutes passed, then 15. 20 minutes after I'd first seen it, I checked one last time. The figure hadn't moved at all, not an inch, still standing there, facing my direction. A chill ran up my back as I finally pulled away from the peephole. This couldn't be normal. No person stands perfectly still for 20 minutes straight. I tried to convince myself it was just some weird prank by another tenant, but deep down, I knew better. I eventually went to bed, though went to bed is probably too generous a description for what actually happened. I lay awake staring at my bedroom ceiling, listening for any sound from the hallway. Every creak of the old building made me tense up. Sleep came in short, fitful bursts. Around 3 in the morning, I got up to check the peephole again. The hallway was empty now, no sign of the strange figure. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. The next day passed in a blur. I went through the motions at work, distracted by thoughts of what I'd seen. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. a combination of being tired and Henry's strange rules playing tricks on my mind. That evening, I realized I'd left a load of laundry in the basement dryer. I grabbed my empty basket and headed for the elevator, eager to retrieve my clothes before turning in for the night. The elevator doors slid open with their characteristic metallic groan. I was about to step inside when I happened to glance at my watch. It was 11:15 p.m. I froze with one foot halfway into the elevator. Henry's second rule suddenly popped into my head. Don't use the elevator after 11 p.m. Take stairs. I hesitated, my foot hovering above the elevator floor. Part of me wanted to ignore the rule. It was just an elevator after all. But after what I'd seen in the hallway last night, I found myself backing away slowly, pulling my foot back from the threshold. As I turned toward the stairwell door, I heard something that made the hair on my arms stand up. A low, mechanical groaning sound echoed up the elevator shaft. Not the normal sounds of cables and pulleys, but something deeper, more guttural, almost organic. And underneath that noise, I could have sworn I heard what sounded like muffled voices. I pushed through the door to the stairwell and hurried down the 7 flights to the basement, my empty laundry basket clutched tightly against my chest. The whole way down, I kept thinking about those sounds from the elevator shaft. They weren't mechanical noises. They sounded almost like whispering. The basement laundry room was brightly lit and smelled of detergent and fabric softener. As I pushed open the door, I saw Beverly Contreras pulling clothes from one of the dryers. She jumped when she heard me enter, spinning around with a startled expression. "Sorry," I said, raising my hands. "Didn't mean to scare you." Beverly pressed a hand to her chest. "No, it's fine. I'm just a little on edge down here at night." She looked different from when I'd met her at the mailboxes. Her face was pale and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She kept glancing nervously at the door as she stuffed clothes into her basket. I spotted my laundry in one of the other dryers and went to retrieve it. "Everything okay?" I asked. Beverly paused, clothes half folded in her hands. Did you take the stairs down here?" "Yeah," I said, pulling out my t-shirts. I was about to take the elevator, but I noticed it was after 11. Something changed in her expression, relief mixed with a knowing fear. "Good," she said quietly. "That's good. You remembered the rule." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her directly. "So, you know about Henry's rules too?" She nodded, her movements becoming more hurried as she packed up her laundry. "Everyone who stays in this building for more than a month knows about them, the ones who don't follow them. They don't tend to stay long." "What happens if you use the elevator after 11? I asked. Beverly's hands trembled slightly as she folded a towel. "I made that mistake. Just once, about 3 weeks after I moved in. I was coming back from a late dinner with friends. It was around midnight, and I was tired, not thinking. I took the elevator instead of the stairs." She fell silent, her eyes fixed on some distant point. "What happened?" I prompted. "The elevator. It didn't go where I wanted it to," she said finally. "The buttons stopped working. It went down instead of up, way down, past the basement. And it stopped somewhere that couldn't exist in this building." She shook her head as if trying to dislodge the memory. "The doors opened and I don't even know how to describe it. It wasn't part of the building. It wasn't anywhere that should exist. And there was something moving in the darkness out there." Beverly hastily shoved the last of her clothes into her basket. I managed to hit enough buttons that the doors closed and the elevator started moving again. When it finally stopped, I was back in the lobby. I ran up all 7 flights of stairs to my apartment and didn't come out for 2 days. She looked at me with an intensity that made me step back. "Always take the stairs after 11. Always. I will never make that mistake again." Before I could ask anything else, she hurried to the door, pausing only briefly to look back at me. "Follow the rules, John. All of them. They're the only thing keeping us safe in this place." With that, she was gone, the door swinging shut behind her. I stood alone in the laundry room, my clean clothes forgotten in the dryer. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, suddenly seeming much dimmer than before. The machines around me ticked as they cooled down, each sound making me flinch. I quickly stuffed my laundry into my basket and headed for the stairs, not wanting to spend another minute alone in the basement. As I climbed back to the 7th floor, I thought about Beverly's story, about the strange figure in the hallway, about Henry's rules. They weren't suggestions. They weren't the paranoid ramblings of an eccentric landlord. They were warnings. Specific, detailed warnings about very real dangers. And I was starting to understand that breaking these rules came with consequences far worse than I could have imagined. I faced another test of Henry's rules the following Tuesday. I'd been out at a cheap Italian place down the block. Nothing fancy, just needed a break from my own cooking. The restaurant had been nearly empty, just me and a couple at a corner table, giving me plenty of time to think about everything that had happened since I moved in. It was around 9:30 when I got back to the building. The lobby was quiet, just the soft buzz of the overhead lights and the faint smell of cleaning solution that never quite seemed to fade. I headed for the elevator, still thinking about Beverly's story and the figure I'd seen in the hallway. The elevator ride was uneventful, though I kept my eyes fixed on the floor indicator, watching the numbers tick upward. When it stopped at the basement level unexpectedly, my heart jumped into my throat. The doors slid open to reveal the empty basement hallway, the laundry room just visible at the far end. That's when I heard it. Soft giggling coming from the laundry room. The sound was faint at first, almost like I might have imagined it. A light, airy sound that didn't belong in the basement of an old apartment building this late at night. I froze, my finger hovering over the close door button. The giggling continued, growing slightly louder. Rule 3 flashed in my mind. If hearing laughter from laundry room, leave immediately. I jabbed the close door button repeatedly until the doors finally slid shut. The elevator resumed its climb, and I leaned back against the wall, breathing hard. When the doors opened at the lobby again, I stepped out and headed straight for the stairs without hesitation. No way was I getting trapped in that elevator if something went wrong. The stairwell was brightly lit, but completely empty, my footsteps echoing off the concrete as I climbed. I'd made it up 2 flights when the giggling returned, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from somewhere below me, but also around me. I picked up my pace, taking the steps 2 at a time. By the 4th floor, the laughter had multiplied. It wasn't just one voice anymore, but several, all giggling with slightly different pitches and tones. The sound echoed through the stairwell, seeming to come from the walls themselves. I reached the 5th floor landing and stopped to catch my breath. The laughter was everywhere now, echoing through what must have been the building's ventilation system. It rose and fell in waves, sometimes fading to almost nothing before swelling again, louder than before. There was something wrong about it, too rhythmic, too coordinated, like the laughers were all following some pattern I couldn't understand. I forced myself to keep climbing. 6th floor. Almost there. The laughter grew more intense with each step, pressing against my ears until it felt like it was inside my head. By the time I reached the 7th floor, I was practically running. I burst through the stairwell door into my hallway, fumbling for my keys as I approached my apartment. The laughter followed me, seeping through the walls, under doors, between floorboards. I jammed my key into the lock, twisted, and practically fell inside, slamming the door behind me and throwing the deadbolt. Inside my apartment, I pressed my back against the door, breathing hard. The laughter was muffled now, but still audible, coming through the vents. I moved through my apartment, checking the windows and the second lock on my door. The sound continued, rising and falling, sometimes seeming to move from one room to another. For an hour, I sat on my couch in the dark, listening as the laughter ebbed and flowed through my apartment. I thought about calling someone. The police, maybe, or Henry. But what would I say? Hello, officer? There's ghostly laughter coming through my vents? I'd sound insane. Eventually, just after 11, the laughter began to fade, growing fainter and fainter until it disappeared completely, leaving behind a silence that felt almost as oppressive as the sound had been. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I dragged myself out of bed after maybe 3 hours of fitful sleep. I needed coffee before work, and there was none left in my apartment. The small cafe in the lobby would have to do. I was waiting for my order when Zayden Skinner walked in. He was dressed for work in his usual business casual, but something was off. His normally neat hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes behind his rectangular glasses. He spotted me and changed direction, heading straight for my table. "John," he said, his voice low and urgent, "can I talk to you for a minute?" "Sure," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Everything okay?" Zayden sat down, glancing around the nearly empty cafe before leaning in. "Did you hear anything strange last night?" I hesitated, studying his face. He looked frightened, genuinely frightened, with the same haunted expression I'd seen on Beverly's face in the laundry room. "The laughter," I said finally. "From the laundry room. It came up through the vents." Zayden's shoulders slumped and he nodded. "I heard it too, all the way up on my floor. It's been happening more often lately." "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Beverly told me about the elevator, and I've seen something in the hallway. What's happening in this building?" Zayden ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up even more. "I don't know exactly, but people who investigate don't tend to stick around." "What do you mean?" He leaned in closer. "Did you know Zachary Foster? He used to live in 4C. I shook my head. "I've only been here a couple weeks. Zachary was a good guy. We'd get drinks sometimes, watch games together." Zayden's voice dropped even lower. 3 months ago, he heard the laughter. It was late, maybe 1 in the morning. He called me, asked if I heard it too. I told him to ignore it, to follow the rules." "Henry's rules," I said. "Yeah. But Zachary, he was curious. Always had been. He told me he was going to check it out, see what was making the noise." Zayden stared down at the table. That was the last time anyone heard from him. A chill ran down my back. What happened to him? Officially? According to building management, he moved out suddenly. No notice, just packed up and left. Zayden's expression hardened. But his sister Ivy has been looking for him ever since. His car was still in the parking garage. His work said he never showed up the next day. His bank accounts haven't been touched. "Jesus," I muttered. "Did anyone call the police?" "Ivy did. They took a report, but..." He shrugged helplessly. "The building manager showed them paperwork saying Zachary had broken his lease and moved out. Said he'd paid the penalty fee in cash. They didn't look too hard after that." "That's insane. People don't just vanish." "In this building, they do." Zayden looked up, meeting my eyes. "Zachary wasn't the first. There was a woman on the 3rd floor last year. Before that, a guy in 5A. They all heard the laughter. They all went to investigate." My coffee arrived, but I barely noticed. "And no one's connected these disappearances? No one's looked into the building?" "People try. Ivy's been digging for months, but there's never any evidence, just empty apartments and paperwork showing they moved out." He checked his watch and stood up. "Look, I've got to get to work, but John, follow the rules, all of them. Don't end up like Zachary." I watched him leave, my coffee cooling untouched on the table in front of me. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too close. I left my coffee and headed for work, needing to get out of the building, to be somewhere normal and sane for a few hours. But even at work, I couldn't focus. My mind kept returning to what Zayden had told me. People disappearing after investigating the laughter. the building management covering it up somehow. It seemed impossible, yet after what I'd seen and heard myself, I couldn't dismiss it. That night, I returned to my apartment with a growing sense of dread. I checked every corner, every closet before I felt safe enough to sit down. I turned on the TV but kept the volume low, straining to hear any unusual sounds. I double-checked the locks on my door, then checked them again. As I sat there in the half-dark of my living room, I realized I was listening for the laughter, both dreading and expecting its return. The building creaked and settled around me, ordinary sounds that now seemed loaded with menace. A pipe knocked somewhere in the walls. The refrigerator hummed. Normal apartment sounds that I suddenly couldn't trust. I stayed up late, watching meaningless TV shows, while really watching my vents, my door, my windows, waiting for whatever might come next, and knowing with cold certainty that something would. I was heading back to my apartment from the bathroom when I saw her. The hallway stretched out in front of me, lit by those dim wall sconces that never seemed to provide enough light. At first, my sleep-deprived brain didn't register what I was seeing. Then I froze. At the far end of the corridor, near the elevator, stood a woman. But something was wrong with her proportions. She was impossibly tall and thin, her white dress hanging from a frame that seemed too stretched to be human. Her black hair hung down, obscuring her face completely as she stood there, completely motionless, facing directly toward me. Rule number 4. Don't make eye contact with the tall woman in the hallways. I dropped my gaze immediately to the worn carpet. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor as I fumbled in my pocket for my keys, nearly dropping them twice before getting a solid grip. The distance to my door felt endless. I was acutely aware of her presence like a physical weight pressing against me even from 30 feet away. The air in the hallway seemed colder, thinner somehow. I didn't dare look up, not even for a second. My hands shook as I tried to get the key into the lock. I missed twice, the metal scraping against the door frame. All the while, I felt her watching me. I couldn't see her eyes. I made damn sure of that, but I could feel them on me, like twin points of ice boring into the top of my lowered head. Finally, the key slid home. I turned it, pushed the door open, and practically fell inside. I slammed it shut behind me and threw the deadbolt, then added the chain for good measure. For several minutes, I just stood there with my back against the door, trying to catch my breath. The encounter had lasted maybe 20 seconds total, but it felt like hours. After I calmed down enough to move, I crept to the peephole and peered out. She was still there, in exactly the same position, not having moved an inch. Still facing my direction, still standing unnaturally still. I backed away from the door. There was no way I was checking again. Not tonight. I retreated to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed, listening for any sound from the hallway. Nothing came. Just the usual creaks and groans of the old building settling. Sleep was out of the question. I left my bedroom light on and sat against the headboard, watching my bedroom door until the first gray light of dawn filtered through my window blinds. When morning finally came, I waited until I heard the sounds of other tenants moving around before I dared to look through the peephole again. The hallway was empty. I opened my door cautiously, half expecting to see her still standing there, despite what the peephole had shown. But the corridor was empty, looking perfectly normal in the morning light. If not for the lingering chill in my bones, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I went through the motions that day at work, my mind constantly replaying the encounter. By the time I got back to the building that evening, I needed to talk to someone who might understand. Someone who'd been here longer. I checked my mailbox in the lobby, hoping to run into another tenant. As if on cue, an older woman with salt and pepper hair was sorting through her mail at the bank of boxes. "Excuse me," I said, approaching her carefully. "I'm John Gregory from 7B. I just moved in a few weeks ago." She looked up at me, her brown eyes sharp and assessing. Polly Ray, 6B. Her voice had a slight accent I couldn't place. She didn't offer her hand, just gave me a polite nod. Nice to meet you, I said. I hesitated, then decided to just come out with it. I was wondering if you've been in the building long. 15 years, she replied, tucking her mail into her purse. Why do you ask? I lowered my voice, though we were alone in the mailroom. I saw something last night. In the hallway on the 7th floor, a woman. Tall, really tall. Wearing a white dress, with long black hair. Polly's expression changed instantly. The polite neutrality vanished, replaced by alarm. She glanced around the mailroom, then took a step closer to me. Did you look at her face? She asked, her voice urgent and low. No, I said quickly. No, I remembered the rules. Mr. Hansen told me not to make eye contact, so I kept my eyes down until I got into my apartment. Relief washed over her face. She reached out and patted my arm. Smart boy. Very smart. So you know about her? She's real? I asked. Polly nodded gravely. Oh, she's real, all right. Too real. She looked around again, then gestured toward the small sitting area in the corner of the lobby. Come, sit for a minute. We moved to the pair of worn armchairs. Polly sat with her purse clutched tightly on her lap, her back straight, not relaxing into the chair. Not everyone follows the rules, she said quietly. Some people think Henry is just a crazy old man, or they get curious, or they forget. What happens if you look at her? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Polly's eyes met mine. 2 years ago, Miles Salazar in 8A. Nice man, worked in insurance. Been in the building about 6 months. He saw her one night and looked right at her face. She paused. They found him the next morning in the hallway, collapsed right where he'd been standing. I waited for her to continue, but she just looked at me expectantly. Was he dead? I finally asked. Yes, she said simply, but that wasn't the worst part. His eyes were gone. Gone? Like removed? Completely gone, not cut out, not gouged, just empty sockets, like they'd never existed at all. Polly made a small sign of the cross over her chest. The official report said brain aneurysm, that he'd clawed his own eyes out during some kind of episode. She shook her head. But those of us who've been here, we know better. I felt sick. Has this happened before? Other than Miles? There have been others, not many. Most people follow the rules. She leaned forward. The rules keep us safe. They're not suggestions, they're survival. I'm starting to understand that, I said, thinking about the knocking, the elevator, the laughter from the laundry room. And now the tall woman. Polly stood up. I should go, but I'm glad you kept your eyes down. Remember all 4 rules all the time. No exceptions. I nodded, still sitting as she gathered her things. One more thing, she said, pausing. If you ever do make eye contact, which you won't because you're smart, don't blink, not even once. It's already too late by then, but at least it'll be quick. With that disturbing advice, she walked toward the elevator, leaving me alone in the lobby with the weight of what she'd told me. I sat there for a long time, thinking about Miles Salazar and his missing eyes, about the tall woman standing motionless in the hallway, about all of Henry's rules that I'd initially dismissed as superstition or the ramblings of an eccentric old man. They weren't superstitions. They weren't jokes. They were warnings. And I was living in a building where breaking the rules meant more than a fine or an eviction notice. It meant something much, much worse. I spent the following weeks living in constant fear. Every creak, every footstep in the hallway outside my apartment made me freeze in place, listening with painful intensity until the sound passed or faded. I never answered knocks after 10, not even when I heard what sounded like Zayden calling my name one night at 10:30. I took the stairs religiously after 11, huffing up all 7 flights rather than risk whatever waited in the elevator after hours. The laundry room became a place I'd only visit in broad daylight, with other tenants nearby. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford. Most nights I'd catch myself jerking awake every hour or so, convinced I'd heard something at my door. I'd drag myself out of bed, shuffling across the cold floor to check the peephole, half expecting to see the tall woman or that stretched shadow figure waiting silently in the hallway. Sometimes I'd check 3 or 4 times in a single night, each time finding nothing but an empty corridor that somehow felt just as threatening as if something had been there. I installed 3 additional locks on my door beyond the standard deadbolt and chain, a reinforced sliding bolt near the floor, another at shoulder height, and a door jammer that wedged under the knob. The hardware store clerk had raised his eyebrows at my purchases but said nothing. What could I have told him anyway? That I lived in a building where the residents disappeared if they broke arbitrary rules about elevators and laundry rooms? I kept a Louisville Slugger baseball bat propped against my nightstand, within easy reach of my bed. Some nights I'd grip it while trying to fall asleep, the smooth wood cool against my palm. Deep down, I knew it would be useless against whatever haunted the building. What good would a bat do against something that could make a man's eyes disappear from his face? But having it nearby made me feel marginally less helpless, and I clung to that small comfort. 1 month after moving in, I sat awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the dark ceiling of my bedroom. The realization had been building for weeks, but it finally crystallized into perfect clarity. Henry's rules weren't suggestions or the paranoid ramblings of an old man. They were survival instructions, plain and simple. This building housed something malevolent, multiple somethings perhaps, and the rules were the only thing keeping us alive. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and opened a browser. My thumb hovered over the search bar for a moment before I typed, "Apartments for Rent Seattle." The screen filled with listings, studios, 1-bedrooms, shared spaces. Most were more expensive than what I paid Henry. But at that moment, I would have gladly lived in a shoebox if it meant getting away from the Meridian. I scrolled through the options, noting addresses and availability dates. Could I break my lease with Henry? Would he understand why I needed to leave? I'd only been here a month, but it felt like years. I wasn't sure how much longer I could endure the constant fear, the vigilance that left me exhausted but unable to truly rest. A studio on Capitol Hill looked promising, small but clean, and available in 2 weeks. I was about to click for more information when I heard it. 3 soft, distinct knocks at my door. I checked the time on my phone, 10:03 p.m. My body went rigid. I switched off my phone, plunging the room into darkness, and sat perfectly still, barely breathing. The knocks came again, just as soft, just as measured. 3 precise taps against the wood. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just sat in the darkness, listening, waiting. Whatever was out there, it wasn't getting in. Not tonight. Not while I followed the rules. I'd stay put, keep quiet, and wait for it to leave. And tomorrow I'd call about that studio on Capitol Hill. I'd figure out how to break my lease, pay whatever penalty Henry required. I just had to follow the rules until I could find somewhere else to live. The knocking came a 3rd time, slightly louder but with the same steady rhythm. Then silence fell, heavy and expectant, as if the thing outside my door was listening just as intently as I was, waiting to see if I'd break the rules again. I decided to investigate the building's history after another sleepless night. My eyes burned from staring at the ceiling for hours, jumping at every creak and groan the building made. By 6 in the morning, I'd given up on sleep entirely and made a pot of coffee, strong enough to keep me alert despite my exhaustion. The Seattle Public Library opened at 9. I was waiting outside when the doors unlocked, clutching my laptop bag and thermos of coffee. The main branch downtown was an architectural marvel of glass and steel, but I barely noticed it anymore as I headed straight for the local history section. "Can I help you find anything specific?" A librarian with gray-streaked hair and rectangular glasses approached my table after I'd been flipping through city records for about 20 minutes. "I'm researching the Meridian Apartments," I said. "Built in 1931, I think. I'm trying to find information about its history." She nodded. "The Meridian on Westlake? I know the building. Let me show you where to look." She guided me to a section of archived newspapers and city records, pulling several folders from the shelves. "These might help. We also have some digitized records from that period if you need more." I thanked her and spread the materials across the table. For the next few hours, I pored through yellowed newspaper clippings, property records, and old photographs. The Meridian had indeed been built in 1931, but what caught my attention was what had stood on the property before. Lakeside Psychiatric Hospital, a facility that had operated from 1897 until 1930 when a fire destroyed much of the main building. The newspaper articles painted a troubling picture. The hospital had been shut down after allegations of patient mistreatment and unauthorized experimental treatments. The land had been quickly sold and redeveloped into the apartment building where I now lived. More disturbing were the articles I found, spanning decades after the Meridian was built. A 1939 piece described the mysterious death of a tenant found in the hallway with unexplained injuries to the face. In 1947, 3 residents disappeared within the same month, with police unable to determine what happened. The pattern continued through the years. Strange accidents, unexplained deaths, people who simply vanished. Most residents stayed less than a year. Those who remained longer were described as reclusive or odd by their neighbors. The building had changed ownership several times, but the incidents never stopped. I almost missed it while scanning through a folder of photographs from the early 1950s. A black and white image showed the Meridian's entrance with a small group of people standing outside. The caption read, "Meridian Apartments reopens after renovations, 1952. My eyes fixed on one figure in particular, a young man in his 20s or early 30s standing proudly next to the main doors. I leaned closer, squinting at the face. The young man was unmistakably Henry Hansen. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. If that was Henry in 1952 and he was in his 20s then, he would be at least in his 90s now, possibly older. But Henry had told me he was the building owner, not just the manager. Had he owned it since the 50s? How was that possible? I checked my watch and realized I'd been at the library for over 5 hours. I gathered my notes, took photos of the most important documents with my phone, and thanked the librarian before heading out. The walk back to the Meridian gave me time to process what I'd learned. The building's dark history stretched back nearly a century, and Henry had been there for most of it. What did he know about the entities that haunted the building? Why did he stay? And, most importantly, why did he continue to rent apartments to people, knowing the dangers they would face? As I approached the building, I spotted Beverly Contreras struggling with several grocery bags as she tried to enter through the main doors. I quickened my pace to catch up with her. "Hey, Beverly, let me help you with those," I called out, reaching for the door. She jumped slightly at my voice, then relaxed when she recognized me. "Thanks, John. I thought I could manage in one trip, but I may have overestimated my carrying capacity." I took 2 of her heavier bags and followed her into the lobby. "Going up to 7? She nodded, glancing nervously at the elevator. "It's only 4:30, so the elevator should be fine, right?" "Yeah, we're good until 11, I confirmed, pressing the call button. We rode up in silence at first. Beverly kept her eyes fixed on the floor numbers as they lit up one by one. I decided to take the chance to ask her about her experiences. "Beverly, I hope you don't mind me asking, but how long have you lived here now?" "Almost a year," she said quietly. "Longer than most, I guess." "Have you seen things besides what you told me about the elevator?" The elevator reached our floor and the doors opened. Beverly didn't move immediately, as if considering whether to answer me here or in the relative safety of the hallway. She stepped out and I followed with her groceries. "Let's get these inside first," she said, unlocking her door. I followed her into apartment 7A, which had the same layout as mine but mirrored. She cleared space on her kitchen counter for the groceries. After putting everything down, she turned to face me, her expression guarded. "I've seen the woman twice," she said finally. "The tall one in the hallway. The first time was about 3 months after I moved in. The second time was just last month. I remembered to look away both times." I nodded. "I saw her too. Once." "Did you look?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "No, I remembered the rule." She visibly relaxed. "Good. That's good." She began unpacking her groceries, placing cans in a cupboard with methodical precision. "There's something else, something not on Henry's list." I waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace. Every morning at exactly 3:17, I hear voices through my bathroom vent. She closed the cupboard door and turned to face me again. They whisper in some language I don't understand. It lasts for exactly 2 minutes, then stops. "Every morning, the same time?" She nodded. 3:17 exactly. I've checked. It never varies, not by a minute, not by a second. "Have you told Henry?" "No, I'm afraid to. I don't know if it's breaking a rule to listen to them. I try not to, but..." She trailed off, then shook her head. "You should go. It's getting late, and I need to put these groceries away." I understood her dismissal and headed for the door. "Thanks for telling me, Beverly." "John," she called as I reached for the doorknob. "If you stay up tonight, listen at 3:17, but don't speak back to them. No matter what they say, don't answer." I returned to my apartment and spent the evening researching psychiatric hospitals of the early 20th century, trying to find more information about Lakeside specifically. I found little beyond what I'd already discovered at the library, but the hours passed quickly as I followed one thread after another. Around midnight, I made a fresh pot of coffee. I was determined to stay awake until 3:17 a.m. to hear what Beverly had described. I set an alarm on my phone for 3:10 just in case, though I doubted I would fall asleep. I was right. Sleep never came as I sat in my living room, laptop open but largely forgotten as I listened to every sound the building made. At 3:10, my alarm vibrated. I silenced it quickly and went to my bathroom, sitting on the edge of the tub with my phone in hand, voice recorder app open and ready. At exactly 3:17 a.m. it started. The whispering came through the vent above my shower, faint at first, then growing just loud enough to make out the cadence but not the words. The language was unlike anything I'd ever heard, not Spanish or French or German or any European language I might recognize. It wasn't Asian sounding either. The syllables flowed with a rhythm that seemed almost mathematical in its precision, rising and falling in patterns that made my skin crawl. I pressed record on my phone, holding it close to the vent. The voices continued, sometimes overlapping as if multiple speakers were having a conversation. There were pauses that suggested questions being asked and answered. Though I couldn't understand a word, the tone conveyed urgency, as if they were discussing something important. After exactly 2 minutes, just as Beverly had said, the voices stopped. The sudden silence felt even more unnatural than the whispering had been. I checked my recording to make sure it had captured the sounds. It had 2 minutes of eerie, incomprehensible whispering. I played back a few seconds and the hair on my arms stood up as the alien syllables filled my bathroom. I retreated to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone in my hand. I now had evidence, actual, recorded evidence, of something impossible happening in this building. But what did it mean? Who were these voices? And what were they saying at precisely 3:17 every morning? More importantly, how did they connect to the tall woman in the hallway, the knocking after 10 p.m., the elevator that descended past the basement, and the laughter in the laundry room? Was Henry aware of all of it? Had he been watching it happen for 70 years? I played the recording again, listening carefully to the strange language. Whatever these entities were, they were communicating with each other. They had a language, which meant they had thoughts, intentions, and that was far more terrifying than any random haunting could ever be. I took the strange recording to a linguistics professor at the local university. The campus seemed almost unnaturally normal after the things I'd been experiencing. Students lounging on grass quads, backpacks slung over shoulders, coffee cups in hand. It felt like stepping into another world. Professor Eliza Chen's office was tucked away in the languages building, a cramped space lined with bookshelves that sagged under the weight of ancient texts. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with short black hair streaked with premature gray and rectangular glasses that she adjusted constantly. "So, Mr. Gregory," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "You mentioned an unusual recording on the phone, something you thought might be an unidentified language." I nodded, pulling out my phone. "I recorded it in my apartment building. It comes through the vents every morning at exactly 3:17. Her eyebrows lifted slightly at the precision of the time, but she didn't comment on it. I played the recording, watching her face carefully. The whispers filled the small office. That same urgent, mathematical pattern of sounds I'd captured in my bathroom. At first, Professor Chen's expression remained neutral, professional. Then her eyes widened. She leaned forward, adjusting her glasses again as if that might somehow clarify what she was hearing. When the 2 minutes of recording ended, she sat back in her chair. The office felt too quiet now. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice different, tighter. "Like I said, it comes through the vents in my building. Every morning, same time." She shook her head. "This isn't possible. What is it?" Professor Chen turned to her computer, typing rapidly. "I specialize in extinct and ancient languages. What you've recorded?" She trailed off, clicking through several files before turning her monitor toward me. The screen showed symbols that looked vaguely like Sanskrit, but more angular, more jagged. "This resembles a dialect that hasn't been spoken in over 3,000 years, a pre-Sumerian language we know almost nothing about." "You recognize it?" I asked, leaning forward. "Not fully, but certain phonetic patterns are unmistakable." She played a short section of my recording again, stopping it to point at her screen. "These particular sounds correspond to these symbols. It's a dead language, one with virtually no surviving speakers or texts. Can you translate any of it?" Professor Chen hesitated. "I can try with fragments. The phonology is similar enough to early Mesopotamian dialects that I might identify some root words." She pulled out a notepad and began scribbling as she replayed sections of the recording, her brow furrowing deeper with each pass. After 20 minutes of this, she pushed the notepad toward me. Her handwriting was tight and precise, but I could see her hand had been shaking. "I can only make out fragments," she said. "But there are repeated references to those who watch, or possibly the watchers, and something about doorways between, or passages between." I stared at her notes, my mouth going dry. "Between what?" She shook her head. "The syntax is unclear. The closest translation might be realms or worlds, but that's speculative." Professor Chen removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "Mr. Gregory, where did you really get this recording?" "I told you." "This isn't something you'd hear through apartment vents," she cut in. "This language predates modern civilization. The few fragments we have exist only in academic collections, and even then, we have no idea how it was actually pronounced." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't tell her about the tall woman or the laughter or the elevator. She'd think I was crazy. "I appreciate your help," I said finally, standing up. "This gives me something to go on." Professor Chen handed me back my phone like she was glad to be rid of it. "Whatever you're involved with, Mr. Gregory, be careful. There's something wrong about this recording. The cadence, the patterns. It's not how humans naturally speak. I left her office with her words ringing in my ears. Not how humans naturally speak. The bus ride back to my apartment building felt longer than usual. I kept replaying the professor's translations in my head. Those who watch, the doorways between. Each word seemed to carry weight, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. When I arrived at the Meridian, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows through the lobby windows. The marble floor gleamed under the light, almost too bright. And there was Henry, on his knees with a rag, polishing an already spotless section near the mailboxes. I watched him for a moment. Henry Hansen, who according to that 1952 photograph, had owned this building for at least 70 years. Henry, who looked like he was in his 70s but had to be well over 90. Henry, who knew exactly what lurked in these halls. He must have sensed me watching because he looked up, his pale blue eyes narrowing slightly when he saw me. "Afternoon, Mr. Gregory," he said, his voice carrying that same gravelly authority I'd heard on my first day. He stood up with surprising ease for a man his age, tucking the rag into his back pocket. "Henry," I said, approaching him, "I need to talk to you." "Something wrong with your apartment?" he asked, but his eyes told me he knew this wasn't about a leaky faucet. "It's about the building." I glanced around the empty lobby, lowering my voice anyway. "About the things that happen here." Henry's face hardened. "I gave you the rules, Mr. Gregory. Follow them and you'll be fine." "That's not good enough anymore." I pulled out my phone. I recorded the voices that come through the vents at 3:17 every morning. Had it translated. Ancient language, Henry. Pre-Sumerian. Talking about watchers and doorways between worlds. Henry went very still. For a moment I thought he might deny everything, might tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he looked toward the front doors, then at the elevator, as if checking that we were truly alone. "Not here," he said finally. "Come with me." I followed him across the lobby to a door marked Management that I'd never seen opened before. Henry unlocked it with an old brass key from a ring that held at least 20 others. Inside was a small office with a desk covered in building maintenance paperwork, filing cabinets against one wall, and a single window that looked out on the alley behind the building. Henry closed the door behind us. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice low. "Recorded them, taken it outside, drew attention." "I needed answers," I said. "People have disappeared from this building, Henry. Died here. What's really going on?" He sank into the chair behind the desk, suddenly looking every one of his years and more. "Sit down, Mr. Gregory." I took the only other chair in the room, a wooden one with a worn cushion. "How long have you owned the Meridian?" I asked. "I found a picture from 1952. You looked about 30 then." A hint of surprise crossed his weathered face. "You've been digging, wouldn't you?" Henry sighed, a deep sound from somewhere ancient inside him. "I bought this building in 1949. I was 27. I did the math quickly. That would make you 100 years old this past April," he said flatly. "Yes. That's not possible. Many things happening in this building aren't possible, Mr. Gregory. Yet here we are." I leaned forward. "What is this place, really?" Henry was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, less the stern landlord, more like someone confessing. "The Meridian sits at an intersection," he said, "not of streets, of realities." "What does that mean?" "This land has always been thin. The native tribes knew it, avoided it. Then they built that asylum here, lakeside. Terrible place. The suffering that happened there made the thinness worse, tore it in places." I remembered the library research. "The asylum burned down in 1930. Henry nodded. "The fire wasn't an accident. They were trying to close something they'd opened. Didn't work." He looked up at me, his pale eyes suddenly intense. The entities you've encountered, the woman, the laughter, the elevator, they're not ghosts, Mr. Gregory. They're not spirits of the dead, or demons, or whatever else you might be thinking. Then what are they? Inhabitants, he said simply. Residents of another world that occasionally crosses over into ours. They find the weak spots and push through. This building stands on the largest tear I know of. I tried to process this. It sounded insane, yet after everything I'd seen, it was almost easier to accept than to deny. Why do they hurt people? I asked. Why the rules? They don't understand our reality any more than we understand theirs. To them, we're as strange as they are to us. The rules. Henry shook his head. I made those after watching dozens of tenants die or disappear. Trial and error, Mr. Gregory. Bloody terrible error. And you've been managing this for what, 70 years? How are you still alive? A bitter smile crossed his face. That's the cruel joke of it all. I tried to leave in 1953, made it as far as the front door before something happened, woke up 3 days later in my apartment. Ever since then, I haven't aged a day. Can't leave the property for more than a few hours without getting violently ill. I'm as trapped here as they are. So you're what? The caretaker? The warden? I prefer to think of myself as a guide, Henry said. I keep people safe when I can. Give them the rules. Most follow them and live here without incident. Some don't. He stood up suddenly. Come with me. There's something you should see. Henry led me back into the hallway, locking his office behind us. We took the elevator down to the basement level. I tensed as the doors opened, half expecting to hear that terrible laughter from the laundry room, but the hallway was silent. Henry walked past the laundry room to a maintenance door at the far end of the corridor. Another key from his ring unlocked it, revealing a narrow staircase leading further down. I didn't know there was a sub-basement, I said, following him down the concrete steps. Most don't, Henry replied. It's not on any of the official building plans. The air grew colder as we descended, with that same weight I'd felt when encountering the tall woman. At the bottom of the stairs was another door, this one reinforced with steel. Henry unlocked it with a different key, one that looked older than the others. This was part of the asylum's basement, he said as he pushed the door open, the only part that survived the fire. The room beyond was large and windowless, illuminated by a single hanging bulb that Henry pulled a chain to light. What I saw made my blood run cold. The walls were covered with photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, arranged in neat rows that stretched from floor to ceiling on all four walls. Black and white images from the 40s and 50s near the door, gradually shifting to color photos from later decades as they spread across the room. Each photo showed a person, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. Ordinary people smiling at the camera, unaware of what awaited them. These are... I couldn't finish the sentence. Every tenant who didn't make it, Henry confirmed, his voice heavy. Every person who broke a rule or found a new way to attract their attention. I moved closer to the nearest wall, examining the photos. Beneath each one was a small, handwritten card with a name and date. Robert Larson, 1961. Maria Delgado, 1974. The dates continued through the decades, including some from just months ago. Zachary Foster, I read aloud from a recent photo, recognizing the name from Zayden's story. So he really did. Followed the laughter to the laundry room at 1 a.m, Henry said. Never came back out. At least, not as himself. I turned to face him. What do you mean, not as himself? Henry gestured to the far wall, where a section of photographs was separated from the others. These people looked wrong somehow. Their smiles too wide, their posture slightly off. Their eyes empty in a way that made my skin crawl. Sometimes they come back, Henry said quietly. But it's not them anymore. Something else wearing their skin. I backed away from the wall, suddenly needing distance from those vacant stares. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you need to understand what we're dealing with." Henry's voice had regained its authoritative edge. "The entities have been more active lately, more aggressive. That recording you made, they're planning something. I can feel it." "Planning what?" "I don't know exactly, but the rules that used to keep people safe might not be enough anymore." He looked at me with unexpected intensity. "Breaking any rule now would likely prove fatal, Mr. Gregory. No second chances." I thought about the tall woman, about how close I'd come to looking at her face, about the knocking I'd ignored at my door. Small decisions that had kept me alive. "Why don't you warn everyone?" I asked. "Tell them everything like you're telling me." "Would you have believed me on your first day?" Henry countered. "Or would you have thought I was a crazy old man and ignored everything I said? The rules are simple, easy to remember. Most people will follow simple rules even if they don't understand why." We left the photo room, Henry locking the door behind us. The climb back up to the main basement level felt like returning to the surface after being underwater too long. I kept seeing those photographs, all those faces of people who had lived in my building, walked the same halls, and then vanished. Back in the lobby, Henry turned to me. "Be careful, Mr. Gregory. More careful than you've ever been." I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of Henry standing in the lobby, looking suddenly ancient and very, very tired. That night, I double-checked every lock on my door before trying unsuccessfully to sleep. My mind kept returning to what Henry had shown me, to his warnings about the entities becoming more active. I wondered if my recording had somehow provoked them, if taking it outside the building had drawn their attention. At exactly 1 a.m, I heard it. 3 distinct knocks on my door. I froze in bed, not even breathing. The knocks came again. Same pattern, same measured pace. I didn't move. Then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard the mechanical groaning of the elevator. That same organic, impossible sound I'd heard before. It was moving, though I hadn't heard the call button or the doors. And beneath both sounds, rising from below, came the laughter. Not just from the laundry room this time, but seeming to travel through the walls themselves, multiple voices giggling with childlike glee and malevolent intent, all 3 phenomena at once. It had never happened before. I slid out of bed, moving as quietly as possible across my apartment to the bathroom. It was the smallest room, the most enclosed, with no vents large enough for anything to get through. I locked the door behind me, then sank down against the bathtub, drawing my knees to my chest. The knocking at my apartment door grew louder, more insistent. The elevator sounds changed pitch, becoming a high, whining moan that made my teeth ache. And the laughter. The laughter seemed to be right outside the bathroom door now, as if the entire building had become a conduit for it. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sounds seemed to bypass my ears entirely, vibrating directly in my skull. I thought about Henry's room of photographs, all those people who had encountered what I was hearing now. I thought about the professor's translation, those who watch, the doorways between. I huddled there on my bathroom floor, trembling as the sounds continued outside my door, wondering if the locks would hold, if the rules still applied, if I would live to see morning. I woke up to darkness. Complete darkness. Not the normal kind with streetlights filtering through the blinds or the dim glow of my alarm clock. This was absolute. My hand reached for the lamp switch beside my bed out of habit, clicking it uselessly several times before my brain caught up. The power was out. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, knocking over a glass of water in the process. The cool liquid spilled across my fingers as I finally found my phone and tapped the screen. 3:17 in the morning. The pale blue light illuminated just enough of my bedroom to cast long, unfamiliar shadows across the walls. I sat up, my heart already beating faster than it should. Power outages happened, sure, but after everything I'd seen in this building, coincidences didn't exist anymore. My phone's flashlight provided a narrow cone of visibility as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The floor felt colder than usual against my bare feet. I moved cautiously toward the bedroom door, pausing to listen. The building had never been this quiet. No humming from the refrigerator, no distant sounds of the heating system. Just a heavy, waiting silence. I stepped into the hallway of my apartment, sweeping the flashlight beam across the familiar space that now looked completely foreign. The shadows seemed to pull away from the light rather than be dispelled by it. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping to find my larger flashlight in one of the drawers. As I rummaged through the junk drawer, my fingers closed around the cool metal cylinder of the flashlight. I clicked it on, relieved when a stronger beam cut through the darkness. I set my phone down on the counter and was about to check the circuit breaker when I heard it. A scream, high-pitched and terrified, coming from across the hall. Beverly. I froze, listening. The scream came again, more desperate this time. Every instinct told me to lock my door, to follow the rules Henry had given me. Don't leave your apartment. Don't engage. But this was Beverly, the only person in this building besides Henry who had been honest with me, who had warned me. I grabbed the Louisville Slugger leaning against my bedroom door frame and gripped the flashlight tighter in my other hand. The bat felt reassuringly solid, though I knew it would be useless against whatever lurked in this building. I moved to my front door, unlocking each of the additional locks I'd installed. The sliding bolt near the floor stuck for a moment, and I had to set the bat down to use both hands. When the final lock clicked open, I retrieved the bat, took a deep breath, and pulled the door open. The hallway was pitch black, my flashlight beam cutting a harsh path through the darkness. Beverly's door, apartment 7A, was directly across from mine. It stood open, a rectangle of deeper darkness. "Beverly?" I called, my voice sounding small and ineffectual in the oppressive silence. Another scream answered me, cut short this time. I crossed the hallway in 3 quick strides, bat raised, flashlight leading the way. The door swung wider as I approached, as if inviting me in. "Beverly, it's John," I called again, stepping into her apartment. The layout mirrored my own. Small entryway opening to a living room, kitchen to the right, bedroom and bathroom down a short hall to the left. My flashlight beam swept across the space until it found Beverly. She stood in the middle of her living room, completely rigid. Her arms hung at her sides, fingers splayed wide, her whole body trembling. But it was her face that sent ice through my veins. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on something across the room, her mouth frozen in a silent scream. I swung my flashlight in the direction of her gaze. The tall woman stood by Beverly's window, the same impossibly thin figure I'd seen in the hallway before. Her white dress seemed to absorb my flashlight beam rather than reflect it. Her long black hair hung down, obscuring most of her face, but not all of it. Before I could react, she turned toward me. The movement was too fluid, too smooth to be human. I immediately dropped my gaze to the floor, Henry's 4th rule screaming in my mind. If you see the tall woman in the hallways, do not make eye contact. But Beverly had already looked. I heard the change in her breathing, shallow and rapid, turning into a gurgling sound. From the corner of my eye, I could see her body begin to convulse, her limbs jerking in unnatural angles. I lunged forward, still keeping my eyes down, and grabbed Beverly's arm. Her skin felt ice cold and slick with sweat. "Beverly, come on," I hissed, pulling her toward the door. She moved like a mannequin with loose joints, her feet dragging across the carpet. The tall woman moved. I couldn't see her directly, but I sensed the shift in the air. Felt rather than saw her impossible speed as she positioned herself between us and the door. My flashlight beam caught the hem of her white dress and the bare, gray-tinged feet beneath it. Beverly made a sound like nothing I'd ever heard, part sob, part choke. I tightened my grip on her arm, my mind racing. We were trapped. Then I remembered something Henry had told me in his office. The entities were bound by their own rules. They had limitations, patterns they had to follow. The tall woman's power came from eye contact. What if we took that away completely? I clicked off the flashlight. The darkness was immediate and absolute. I heard Beverly's ragged breathing next to me and felt her trembling arm under my fingers. But I also heard something else. A soft hiss like air escaping a punctured tire coming from where the tall woman stood. "Come on," I whispered to Beverly, dropping the bat to grab her with both hands. "Keep your eyes closed no matter what." I pulled Beverly to the left, away from where I'd last seen the tall woman. My free hand found the wall, and I used it as a guide, shuffling sideways toward where I knew the door would be. Beverly moved with me, her steps uncoordinated but following. The air grew colder as we moved, and I knew the tall woman was still there, still close. But in the complete darkness, eye contact was impossible. Her primary weapon was neutralized. My fingers found the door frame, then the open space of the doorway. I pulled Beverly through it, into the equally dark hallway. "The stairs," I whispered. "We need to get to the stairs." We moved faster now, my hand trailing along the wall of the corridor, counting doors until we would reach the stairwell at the end. Beverly stumbled beside me, making small whimpering sounds, but kept moving. Behind us I heard something new, a sound like fingernails, or something sharper scraping against the wall, slow, deliberate strokes that followed our path. The sound grew louder, closer, as if whatever made it was gaining speed. My hand finally found the metal push bar of the stairwell door. I shoved it open, pulling Beverly through with me. The scraping sound reached the doorway just as it closed behind us. The stairwell offered a brief reprieve from the horror of Beverly's apartment. But we couldn't stay there. We stumbled down several flights, Beverly still trembling against me, her skin cold and clammy. When we finally pushed through the door to the lobby, I was shocked to find we weren't alone. At least a dozen residents stood huddled together in small groups, their faces illuminated by the weak glow of cell phone flashlights. "John, over here." I recognized Zayden's voice and turned toward it. He stood near the mailboxes with 3 other residents I didn't know. As we approached, I could see he was clutching his right arm, blood seeping between his fingers and staining his shirt sleeve. "What happened to you?" I asked, still supporting Beverly, who seemed barely able to stand. "The elevator," Zayden said through clenched teeth. "I was on the 4th floor when the power went out. I tried to take the stairs, but something was in the stairwell. Scratching, moving. So I pried the elevator doors open to try climbing down the shaft." He winced, adjusting his grip on his bleeding arm. "Something grabbed me from below. I barely pulled free." One of the other residents, an older man with thinning hair, spoke up. "I heard that damn laughter coming through my kitchen vent, louder than ever before." "Me too," said a woman nearby, "and knocking on my door. But it wasn't just 3 knocks this time, it kept going, like someone was trying to break it down." Beverly suddenly made a choking sound beside me. Her eyes were still wide, unfocused. She was in my apartment," she whispered. "The tall woman. I looked up and she was just standing there. I couldn't look away." The lobby doors swung open with a bang, making everyone jump. Henry Hansen stepped inside, carrying 2 large battery-powered lanterns that cast long shadows across the marble floor. His face looked more deeply lined than ever, his eyes sunken with a grim determination. "Everyone stay calm," he called out, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to leave the building immediately. Follow me to the front doors." The group moved together toward the main entrance, a current of nervous energy pushing us forward. Henry set 1 lantern on the floor and pulled a ring of keys from his pocket, selecting one and inserting it into the lock. He turned it, then pushed against the door. Nothing happened. Henry tried again, pushing harder this time, then throwing his shoulder against it. The door remained firmly shut. "That's impossible," he muttered, trying another key. "These doors don't lock from the outside." A young woman near the front tried the handle herself, then began pounding on the glass. "It won't budge." Henry moved to the side entrance, trying those doors as well. They too remained sealed. He returned to the group, his face ashen in the lantern light. "The building has sealed itself," he said, his voice barely audible. A ripple of panic moved through the gathered residents. Someone started crying. A man shouted that we should break the windows, but as he picked up a nearby chair, a sound cut through the chaos. Laughter. Not just from the laundry room now, but seemingly from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath our feet. It was high and childlike but wrong, distorted, multiplying and echoing until it seemed like dozens of voices were surrounding us. The shadows on the walls began to move independently of our lantern light, stretching and dancing across the marble. They looked almost like figures, tall, thin figures with elongated limbs. "Henry, what's happening?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The old man's face seemed to age another decade before my eyes. "It's a convergence," he said. "It happens rarely, perhaps once every few decades. The barriers between our world and theirs weaken completely." "What do we do?" Zayden asked, still clutching his bleeding arm. Henry hesitated, then spoke quietly. "There is one more rule I never shared. I hoped none of you would ever need it." He looked around at our frightened faces. "During a convergence, the entities can be banished, but only temporarily. The building's original blueprints are the anchor that binds them here. If they're destroyed in the right way, it will force them back and seal the breach." "Where are these blueprints?" I asked. "In my office," Henry replied. "Locked in the bottom drawer of my desk. But getting there now." He trailed off, looking toward the darkened hallway. The laughter grew louder, and the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch toward us. Beverly whimpered beside me. "I'll go," I said, surprising myself. "Tell me exactly what to do." Henry looked at me with a mixture of hope and resignation. "The blueprints are in a leather tube. There's a ritual written on a page beside them. Follow it exactly. You'll need to burn the blueprints while reciting the words." "You can't go alone," Zayden said. Henry shook his head. "He must. I need to stay here to protect the others. The entities are drawn to groups. They'll focus on us while you move through the building." He handed me one of the lanterns. "Be careful. They're everywhere now." I nodded, trying to ignore the fear threatening to paralyze me. I gently passed Beverly to another resident, a middle-aged woman who put her arm around her protectively. "The management office is behind the door marked Management in the east hallway," Henry said. "The key is under the potted plant outside. The desk drawer key is taped to the underside of the middle desk drawer." I took a deep breath and turned toward the hallway leading away from the lobby. The laughter seemed to follow me, growing more excited as I moved away from the group. The lantern light created a small bubble of visibility around me, beyond which the darkness seemed absolute. I moved quickly but carefully, keeping my eyes on the floor whenever I sensed movement in the shadows. Twice I had to freeze and press myself against the wall as dark figures crossed my path. Not the tall woman, but something else. Something that seemed to flow rather than walk. The management door was where Henry said it would be. I found the key under the plant and unlocked it with shaking hands, then slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The office was small and cluttered with filing cabinets and maintenance paperwork. I moved to the desk and found the key exactly where Henry had described. The bottom drawer contained a worn leather tube. I pulled it out and opened it, extracting yellowed blueprints that crackled with age. Beside them was a single page covered in strange, angular writing, with English translations beneath each line. I spread the blueprints on the desk and read through the ritual. It required me to place the blueprints in a metal container, recite the words on the page, and then burn them completely to ash. I found a metal wastebasket and placed it on the desk, then put the blueprints inside. Just as I was about to begin reading the ritual, the temperature in the room plummeted. The door hadn't opened, but I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel it, a presence behind me, watching. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew it was her, the tall woman. With trembling hands, I pulled out my lighter and held it to the corner of the blueprints. The paper caught slowly, a small flame licking at the edges. I began reading the words on the page, strange syllables that felt wrong in my mouth, like they weren't meant for human tongues. The presence moved closer. I could hear the rustle of fabric, feel cold breath on the back of my neck. The blueprints were burning faster now, the flames consuming the old paper. I continued reading, my voice growing stronger with each line, even as I felt icy fingers brushing against my shoulder. As I spoke the final words, the building shuddered violently. The walls seemed to ripple, and a high-pitched shriek pierced the air. Not human, not even animal, but something else entirely. The sound built until it was almost unbearable, and then suddenly stopped. The presence behind me was gone. The room felt normal again, the air no longer freezing. I turned around slowly. The office was empty. I made my way back to the lobby where Henry and the others waited. The shadows had returned to normal, and the laughter had stopped. Henry was at the front doors, which now swung open easily to the night air outside. "It worked," he said simply as I approached. "You did it." The residents poured out of the building, some crying with relief, others moving in shocked silence. I handed the lantern back to Henry, who looked at me with tired eyes. "Thank you," he said. "It won't last forever, but it gives everyone time to leave." "What about you?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "I told you before, I can't leave for long. This is my burden to bear." I wanted to say more, but Beverly needed medical attention, and Zayden's arm was still bleeding. We all needed to get away from this place. 3 months later, I live in a small apartment across town. It's nothing special, just a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom with a shower that runs hot for exactly 4 minutes before turning cold. But it's mine, and more importantly, it's normal. I still follow Henry's rules out of habit. I never answer my door after 10. I take the stairs if it's late. I leave any room where I hear unexpected laughter, and I never ever make eye contact with strangers in hallways. I know I survived something few others have experienced. The doctors said Beverly suffered a severe panic attack combined with hypothermia of unknown origin. She moved back to Oregon to live with her parents. Zayden needed 20 stitches in his arm. He claimed it was a biking accident. We don't talk about what really happened. Sometimes at night, I wake up at exactly 3:17 and listen carefully for whispers. My new apartment is quiet, normal, but I can't shake the lingering fear that these entities might someday find me again. That perhaps they're not bound to the Meridian at all, but to the people who have encountered them. I keep my baseball bat beside my bed and extra locks on my door, just in case.